Lila Wood stepped onto the range, armed with nothing but a second-hand rifle and the determination to shatter every expectation. In a world that told her she didn't belong, she was about to prove them all wrong. This wasn't just about shooting, it was about rewriting the rules. Today she wasn't just fighting for a trophy, she was fighting for a legacy. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Lila Woods stood outside the Grand Oakstone Shooting Club, her hands tightly gripping the strap of her second-hand rifle case. The towering columns of the club loomed over her, gleaming under the morning sun, their polished surfaces reflecting a world she had never been a part of. She adjusted her worn-out sneakers, trying to steady her nerves. She had walked 12 blocks to get here, past the busy city streets, potholes, and broken-down storefronts. She had walked through 2 separate encounters with men who tried to tell her to smile, but she hadn't smiled. Not once. Her heart pounded in her chest, louder than the distant hum of the traffic behind her. This was a world of perfection, a world where people like her didn't belong. She was used to it, though, used to the judgment, used to the looks. But today she wasn't here to make anyone comfortable. She was here to prove something, not to them, but to herself. As she walked up to the pristine glass doors, a woman behind the counter in the lobby turned her eyes toward Lila with a gaze that could freeze fire. Mrs. Granger, the receptionist, didn't move from her spot. She just watched Lila with a look that was somewhere between confusion and distaste. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Granger asked, her voice laced with condescension, as though she already knew the answer. Lila stood still for a moment, her chest tightening, but then she spoke, her voice steady despite the tension coursing through her veins. "I'm here to shoot," Lila said simply, not a hint of hesitation in her tone. The woman raised an eyebrow, glancing over Lila's old rifle case, the worn edges and the duct tape that patched it up. "This isn't a carnival booth, sweetheart," she said, her voice sharp. "We don't let just anyone onto our lanes." Lila's heart skipped, but she didn't flinch. She had been turned away before, at places less exclusive than this. She had been told she wasn't welcome, that she didn't belong, but she had never let that stop her. "I checked your website," Lila continued, reaching into her backpack and pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. "Day passes are $75 plus lane fees." She handed the sheet to Mrs. Granger, who took it without a word, her fingers curling around the paper like she was handling something filthy. The receptionist scanned the paper briefly before giving Lila a tight smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. She turned to the computer, tapping the keyboard with slow deliberation as if processing Lila's presence was an inconvenience. Just then, the door to the lobby swung open, and a group of teens walked in. They were dressed in expensive shooting gear, custom rifle cases hanging over their shoulders like trophies, their jackets embroidered with designer names. Lila's eyes followed them as they made their way toward the front desk, where Mrs. Granger greeted them warmly, calling each by name. They were all familiar faces here, like they had been born with a golden ticket to the world of the privileged and elite. And then there was Carter Langston. Lila's stomach turned when she saw him. He was everything she had always been told to aspire to, and yet, everything she hated. Tall, blonde, with an easy smile that oozed confidence, he was the club's golden boy. His eyes flicked over Lila's appearance, scanning her from head to toe, and for a split second, the smile faded from his face. The look he gave her was one of dismissal, a silent judgment that made her feel small. But Lila didn't flinch. She had seen that look before. She had felt the sting of those eyes on her, trying to make her shrink back into the shadows. But not today. "You sure you want to be here?" Carter asked loud enough for the others to hear, his voice dripping with mockery. Lila ignored him, her eyes focused on the receptionist who, after a few more moments of typing, finally looked up. "Lane 12, she said flatly, turning the computer screen toward Lila. "It's the furthest one, and the broken bench. No complaints." Lila nodded, her face betraying nothing. She wasn't surprised. Lane 12 was where they put the people they didn't want to see. the ones they thought weren't good enough to be in the spotlight. Mrs. Granger didn't even look at her as she handed over a waiver to sign. "You sure you know how to use that thing?" she asked, her voice bored. Lila swallowed the retort that rose in her throat. She wasn't here for a fight, not yet. She just wanted her lane. She just wanted to shoot. When she reached lane 12, the conditions were exactly as expected. The lights flickered overhead, the target holders were bent, and the bench wobbled like it might collapse at any moment. But Lila didn't care. She set down her rifle case and unzipped it, revealing the Winchester Model 70 that had been with her through thick and thin. It was a rifle that had seen better days, its stock worn smooth by time and countless hours of practice, but it was hers. Her first shot missed the target by a small margin, just enough to make the man on lane 10 laugh. He was wearing a leather shooting jacket and had a look of superiority that reminded her of Carter. "Does she even know which way the barrel points?" he muttered loud enough for Lila to hear. Lila didn't respond. She reloaded, steadied her breath, and aimed again. Her second shot clipped the outer ring. The third one kissed the bottom rim of the target. They weren't perfect, but they were hers. Every miss, every shot, was a lesson learned. As she packed up to leave, she noticed Mr. Santiago, the club's janitor, watching her from across the room. He had been quiet throughout her practice, but now he approached her slowly. "You're gripping too tight," he said quietly. "Breathe out as you pull the trigger, let the shot surprise you." He turned and walked away before she could respond, his words sinking in like seeds planted in the rich soil of her determination. Lila didn't know it yet, but that advice would be the key to everything that was about to unfold. She wasn't just shooting for a spot in the club anymore. She was shooting to shatter every expectation, every barrier that had been built to keep her out. And as the door of Oakstone Shooting Club closed behind her, Lila knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The next day, the sun had barely risen when Lila made her way back to the Oakstone Shooting Club. She had set out before the city was fully awake, the streets still quiet, save for the distant hum of the early morning traffic. The air was crisp, biting at her cheeks as she walked. Her rifle case, now slung over her shoulder, felt heavier than it had the day before. But it wasn't just the weight of the rifle, it was the weight of everything she was carrying, the doubts, the judgment, the need to prove herself. Lila's resolve had only deepened overnight. The words of Mr. Santiago from the day before, "Breathe out as you pull the trigger, let the shot surprise you," kept echoing in her mind, grounding her thoughts as she walked toward the club. She had spent the previous evening in her cramped apartment, practicing her stance and breathing in front of her bedroom mirror. Each time she pulled the imaginary trigger, she focused on that one phrase, "Let the shot surprise you." The idea felt foreign to her at first. Her mind had always been consumed by perfection, by hitting the target every time. But she was starting to understand that shooting wasn't about perfect precision. It was about control over her thoughts, her body, and the world around her. When she arrived at the club, the atmosphere was the same as before. The marble floors gleamed under the bright lights, and the polished wooden walls reflected the club's prestigious reputation. Lila took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy glass doors, the sound of them sweeping open echoing in the quiet lobby. Mrs. Granger was at the front desk, her eyes skimming the guest list, not yet noticing Lila standing before her. "You're early," Mrs. Granger muttered, not looking up. "I've already told you where you belong. Lane 12. Lila didn't reply. She didn't need to. She knew what was expected of her. Lane 12, the broken bench, the dim lighting. It was the lane they gave to the people they didn't want to. Acknowledge the ones they thought didn't belong. But Lila didn't need their approval, not anymore. As she walked past Mrs. Granger, she noticed a group of well-dressed club members entering. They were the usual crowd, the privileged ones, the ones who belonged. They wore custom-made jackets with their names embroidered on the sleeves and carried pristine, state-of-the-art rifles. They moved with the confidence of those who had never been told they didn't belong. Among them was Derek Thorne, the club's most celebrated champion. Lila had seen him on the posters and heard his name whispered in the halls of Oakstone. He was the embodiment of what it meant to be a successful shooter, wealthy, handsome, and skilled. He had everything. And then there was Lila, standing alone in the middle of it all, clutching her rifle case like a symbol of defiance. She could feel their eyes on her, their silent judgment. But this time, she didn't shrink. She walked past, them with purpose, heading toward lane 12 without hesitation. When she reached her lane, she didn't allow herself to be discouraged by the broken bench or the flickering lights. She didn't mind that the other shooters were clustered around the premium lanes, their laughter and loud conversations filling the air. Lila had come for a different reason. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need to fit into their world. She was carving her own path. She set her rifle case on the wobbly bench, the old wood creaking under the weight. As she carefully unzipped it, the familiar sight of her Winchester Model 70 brought a sense of calm over her. She had spent years with this rifle, practicing in her backyard, learning the art of shooting from trial and error. No one had ever coached her. No one had ever told her how to shoot. She had done it all on her own. Her first few shots were far from perfect. The first missed the target by a fraction, while the second clipped the outer ring. The third wasn't much better, but it was a hit. The man on lane 10, dressed in a leather jacket with a smug grin, couldn't resist mocking her. "You sure you know what you're doing?" he called out, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Lila didn't answer. She just reloaded her rifle, her grip steady, her focus sharper than ever. She wasn't here to prove anything to him. She was here to prove something to herself. As the afternoon wore on, Lila continued to shoot, the sound of her rifle firing breaking the silence of the range. Each shot was an improvement, each miss a lesson learned. She wasn't aiming for perfection anymore. She was aiming for consistency. The people around her began to take notice. The smirking man on lane 10 stopped laughing, his attention now fixed on Lila as she reloaded and fired again. Lila's shots were becoming more precise, her stance more confident. She wasn't just shooting for the target. She was shooting for her place in this world. Just as Lila was beginning to feel a sense of accomplishment, a figure appeared at the edge of her lane. It was Mr. Santiago, the janitor. He had been watching her from a distance all afternoon, his presence a quiet reminder that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected places. "You're gripping too tight," he said, his voice low and steady. "Breathe out as you pull the trigger. Let the shot surprise you." Lila paused, considering his words. He hadn't been watching her to judge her. He had been watching to teach her. She took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs before releasing it slowly. She adjusted her grip, loosening her fingers around the rifle. When she pulled the trigger again, the shot was perfect. It hit dead center. Mr. Santiago didn't smile. He just nodded and walked away, his presence fading as quietly as it had arrived. But his words had stayed with Lila. She had always been taught to hold on tight, to control everything around her. But now, for the first time, she realized that control didn't always come from force. Sometimes it came from letting go. The afternoon passed in a blur of shots and silence. Each time Lila squeezed the trigger, she felt a little more like herself. By the time she packed up her rifle and headed for the exit, she knew she had taken the first step toward something bigger. This wasn't just about the shooting range anymore. It was about taking ownership of her life, her journey, and her destiny. Lila's name would be remembered at Oakstone Shooting Club, but not for the reasons they expected. And soon, they would learn what it truly meant to underestimate her. Because this was only the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet determination. Lila woke up early every morning, the sound of the city just beginning to stir as she tied her sneakers and grabbed her rifle case. Each day she walked the same path to Oakstone Shooting Club, past the familiar streets, the same potholes, the same abandoned storefronts that had become a backdrop to her life. The world around her was still the same, but something inside her had shifted. She was no longer walking just for the sake of it. She was walking with purpose. Each trip to the club felt like a quiet rebellion. Lane 12 was still hers, the furthest, the most ignored. But it didn't matter. What had once been a symbol of exclusion had become a place of opportunity. Lila didn't need to stand in the spotlight. She had learned that it wasn't the shiny trophies or the gleaming lanes that made a true shooter. It was the ability to fight for a place, to carve out a spot for yourself when the world told you that you didn't belong. That's what she was doing. And with each day she grew stronger. But despite her resolve, there was a growing tension inside her that she couldn't shake. Every shot she fired felt like a small victory, but they were only victories in the confines of Oakstone's walls. Out there in the world, the doubts continued to nag at her. The whispers, the judgments. At home, the silence was becoming unbearable. Lila's mother, Jane Woods, had been working double shifts at the diner again. The constant hum of the cash register and the clink of dishes in the background were the soundtrack to Lila's childhood. But now, there was a noticeable distance between them. Jane's worry for Lila's future, her concerns about her daughter's unorthodox dream, had begun to seep into every conversation. "You spent how much on that gun?" Jane's voice was tinged with exhaustion and fear. She stood in the small living room, pacing back and forth like she was walking through an invisible storm. The smell of bacon grease still clung to her apron, a scent that always seemed to remind Lila of her mother's tireless work. "It's not a hobby, Mom," Lila replied, her voice low but steady, the words coming out in a quiet defiance she hadn't expected from herself. "It's not just a phase." Her mother stopped pacing and looked at her, eyes tired but filled with a deep unspoken love. "I know you're trying, Lila, but this isn't the way to build your future. You're a senior. You've got a future to think about. Scholarships, college, applications, not guns and competitions." Lila felt the weight of those words sink in. Her mother had always wanted what was best for her, but that vision didn't include a second-hand rifle or a shooting range. Lila had always been told that her place in the world would be limited. There were scholarships for people like Carter Langston, for people with money, connections, and the right last name. But there were no scholarships for girls who worked double shifts at a diner, girls who scraped by and who were told that their dreams were too big for a world that had already decided who belonged and who didn't. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, Lila sat on the edge of her bed, rifle in hand. She ran her fingers along the stock of her Winchester Model 70, the familiar touch of the wood grounding her in a way nothing else could. She had been practicing every night, watching YouTube tutorials, repeating drills over and over until her fingers ached and her eyes felt like they would close on their own. Her eyes stayed open though, glued to the screen as another tutorial popped up. The instructor, a man with a weathered face and an authoritative voice, spoke of precision, breathing techniques, and control. "The difference between a champion and an average shooter is not talent," he said. "It's discipline. Discipline in your stance, your aim, your shot, and above all, discipline in your mind." Lila clicked off the video and pulled the rifle to her chest. Her eyes closed, and she let the words wash over her. Discipline, control, focus. She had it all. She had more determination than she had ever known. The people who told her she didn't belong were wrong. She wasn't going to fade into the background. She wasn't going to be another forgotten face at the range. Lila made a silent promise to herself that night. She would not quit. Not now. Not ever. The next morning she was at Oakstone again. This time it was different. She wasn't just another shooter on lane 12. She was someone with a purpose, with a fire that had started to burn brighter than ever before. As she walked through the doors of the club, Mrs. Granger looked at her with the same dismissive gaze. But Lila didn't flinch. She kept walking, past the polished walls, past the laughing elite shooters, straight to lane 12. It was still the same lane, but today it felt different. Today, Lila wasn't just trying to fit in. She was claiming this space as her own. As she set up her rifle, her hands moved with a new sense of confidence. The broken bench didn't bother her anymore. The flickering lights didn't distract her. She was focused, determined to get the shot right. Her first few attempts were shaky, but she knew they would be. It was part of the process. She reloaded, breathing steady and deep, and took her next shot. This time, it was dead center, She smiled to herself, not because the shot was perfect, but because it was hers. For the rest of the afternoon, Lila didn't notice the time passing. The world around her seemed to fade as she sank deeper into her rhythm. Her shots grew tighter, her aim more precise. She wasn't just shooting, she was growing stronger. She could feel the eyes of the others on her now. They were no longer laughing. They were watching. As the day wound down and the club began to empty, Lila packed up her gear and walked out of the range. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she didn't need to. She was no longer defined by the expectations of others. She was her own definition, and that was enough. When she walked past the receptionist on her way out, Mrs. Granger looked up from her clipboard, her gaze flicking over Lila's worn rifle case. There was something different in her eyes now, something that wasn't there before. Lila met her gaze and smiled. This was just the beginning, and she was ready. The following week, Lila stood at the front door of Oakstone Shooting Club once again. The air was thick with anticipation, and though she was familiar with the scent of gunpowder and the soft hum of fluorescent lights, today felt different. Today, everything was different. She had been back to Lane 12 every day since the first time she fired that rifle, no longer just a symbol of exclusion, but a symbol of growth. She had spent hours practicing, refining her stance, improving her shots. But each time she stepped onto the range, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was on the horizon. She wasn't just there to shoot, she was there to change everything. When she entered the lobby, Mrs. Granger barely glanced up from her clipboard. Lila didn't expect anything more. The receptionist was still the same, her demeanor as cold and dismissive as ever. Lila wasn't bothered. She had learned to block out the negativity, to focus on the target in front of her and not the people who didn't believe in her. But then a voice from behind caught her attention. "Well, if it isn't the girl who thinks she belongs here," said a voice that dripped with mockery. Lila turned to see Carter Langston, the club's golden boy, leaning against the counter with a smirk plastered across his face. His entourage stood around him, looking at Lila as if she were an inconvenience, a reminder of the gap between them. "Still playing with that old thing?" Carter added, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He motioned to her rifle case with a flick of his hand. "You know this is a private club, right? Maybe you should stick to, I don't know, something a little more your speed." Lila didn't flinch. She had heard it all before. From people like Carter. From people who never believed in someone like her. She took a deep breath, letting the words roll off her like water off a duck's back. "I belong here just as much as anyone else," Lila said, her voice steady and firm. "And I'm not leaving until I prove it." The smirk on Carter's face faltered for just a moment, and then he shrugged. "We'll see about that. Good luck, sweetheart," he called after her as she turned away, heading toward the shooting range. Lila set her rifle case down on the worn bench of Lane 12, as usual, but this time it felt different. She could feel the eyes on her, the eyes of the other members, the ones who watched with silent judgment, the ones who thought she didn't belong. But today, she wasn't going to let them rattle her. She was here for herself, not for them. Her hands moved with precision, unloading her rifle and setting up her targets. She could feel the weight of the moment. She wasn't just shooting for a spot at the club anymore. She was shooting for respect. She was shooting to break every barrier they had set for her. As she prepared, she caught a glimpse of Derek Thorne, another champion shooter at the club, eyeing her from across the room. His gaze was not dismissive, but analytical, calculating. Lila could feel the tension building. This was no longer just about proving herself to the others. This was about showing them that she could stand toe-to-toe with the best of them and come out on top. Her first shot flew downrange, hitting just outside the bullseye. A miss. The whispers started, low murmurs from the people watching, and Lila could almost hear the internal commentary. She's not going to make it. She's not good enough. But she didn't listen. She reloaded and adjusted. She steadied herself, remembering the advice from Mr. Santiago, the janitor. Breathe out as you pull the trigger. Let the shot surprise you. Her next shot landed closer to the center, but still not perfect. She exhaled sharply, her mind narrowing in on the target. Each breath was slower, more controlled. Then, she fired again. This time, the shot was dead center. A perfect hit, a hit that made the whispers stop. Lila didn't look around to see their reactions. She didn't need to. She knew the shift had happened. For the next hour, Lila continued to fire. With each shot, she felt her confidence grow. The taunts, the judgments, the underestimation, it didn't matter anymore. She was in control. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here to claim her place, to make them understand that she belonged just as much as anyone else. But as she reloaded for the final round, something unexpected happened. A man appeared at the edge of the range. He wasn't wearing the usual shooting club uniform. His attire was simple, jeans and a plain jacket, but there was something about him that stood out. It was the quiet way he observed, the way he didn't judge, but instead watched with an intense focus that seemed to pierce right through her. Lila didn't know who he was, but there was something about him that made her nervous. She had felt this before, this sense that someone was watching her, not to judge, but to see something she hadn't yet recognized in herself. The man walked over and stopped just behind her lane, watching her shots. Lila continued undeterred, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was somehow different from the others. When she finished, he stepped forward. "You're gripping too tight," he said, his voice low and calm. "Loosen your hands, breathe in, and let the shot surprise you. You're fighting your own strength. Control comes from surrendering to the shot, not forcing it." Lila froze, her hands trembling slightly as she placed her rifle back in its case. There it was again, Mr. Santiago's words. Let the shot surprise you. But now it was coming from someone else. She turned to face the man. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Lila asked, trying to mask the unease in her voice. "I'm Coach Donovan," he replied simply. "I used to be a coach for national shooting teams. I've seen a lot of shooters come and go, but you've got something. You just don't know how to use it yet." Lila blinked. This was a man who had trained champions, a man whose name she had heard in passing at Oakstone, and he was standing here telling her that she had potential. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice softening. "To see if you were ready for the next step," Donovan replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've got talent, but talent alone isn't enough. If you want to take this seriously, you're going to need more than just a rifle. You're going to need discipline, strategy, and grit, and I'm offering to teach you, but only if you're serious about this." Lila stood there for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had known that her journey would be hard, but now, with this unexpected offer, she realized it was about to get a lot harder, and maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what she needed. "I'm serious," she said finally, meeting his gaze. "Show me what I need to do." Coach Donovan nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Good. I'll meet you here, tomorrow. Be ready to work." As Lila walked away from the range, her rifle case slung over her shoulder once again, she knew that something had shifted. She wasn't just fighting for a spot anymore. She was fighting for a future. For the chance to be something more than what others thought she could be. The challenge had only just begun, but now she had someone in her corner who saw what she could become. Tomorrow, she would face the next hurdle. But Lila didn't fear challenges. She welcomed them. The Oakstone Shooting Club was buzzing with excitement that morning. A low hum of voices and the clinking of rifle cases filled the air. The Oakstone Open was finally here, and the stakes had never been higher. This was the moment Lila Woods had been waiting for. The moment when everything she had worked for, every sacrifice and every long hour at the range, would come down to this one competition. Lila walked into the club with a calm determination, her rifle case slung over her shoulder. She had been here countless times before, but today felt different. Today she wasn't just walking into the Oakstone Shooting Club as an outsider. Today she was a competitor, a real contender, ready to prove to everyone that she belonged. She passed the usual crowd of shooters, their expensive gear and polished equipment gleaming in the bright lights. Lila couldn't help but notice the looks she was getting. Some were dismissive, others curious, and a few were filled with outright disbelief. She could hear the whispers before they even reached her. Who is she? What is she doing here? Lila ignored them all. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here to win, to show them that she wasn't just a girl with a second-hand rifle. She was a shooter, just as skilled as any of them, and maybe even better. The judgment they passed on her had no power over her anymore. As she walked toward the registration desk, her eyes caught sight of Derek Thorne standing at the far end of the range. Derek was a legend at Oakstone, one of the club's top shooters. His reputation preceded him. He was the one to beat. Tall, blonde, and confident, Derek had never had to fight for respect the way Lila had. To him, winning was second nature. He was a favorite to win the competition, and everyone knew it. But today, Lila wasn't intimidated. She was focused. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, months even. Every practice session had led to this. Every single shot had been a step toward her goal. And she wasn't going to let anyone, not even Derek, stand in her way. The announcer's voice broke through the crowd, calling for all competitors to take their positions. Lila stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Her lane was set. Lane 7, right in the center, the prime spot. She glanced at Derek, who stood confidently at his lane, his rifle already in hand. A smug grin crossed his face as their eyes met. "You think you can take me down?" Derek's voice was loud enough for everyone around them to hear. He was smirking, his friends laughing in the background. Lila didn't respond. She didn't need to. She simply raised her rifle and focused on the target downrange. Her mind was clear, her breathing steady. All she could think about was the shot. She wasn't here for his games or his taunts. She was here to do one thing: shoot. The first round began and the crowd fell silent. Lila took her first shot. It was clean, centered, a solid hit. She didn't look at the scoreboard. She didn't need to. She knew what she had to do. Derek went next. His shots perfect, as expected. He was a skilled shooter, but Lila wasn't. Backing down. Her second shot was just as clean, hitting the center of the target. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the competition bearing down on her. But she stayed focused. As the rounds continued, Lila's shots remained consistent. She wasn't worried about Derek's score. She was worried about her own. Each shot she took was a reflection of everything she had learned, everything she had fought for. The sound of her rifle firing became like a heartbeat, steady and sure. Then came the final round, the deciding moment. Lila's hands were steady, but her heart was racing. This was it. She couldn't afford a single mistake. She lined up her shot, took a deep breath, and pulled the trigger. The shot flew downrange, hitting the target with a satisfying crack. But it wasn't just any hit. It was a perfect shot right in the bullseye. A perfect 10. The crowd gasped. Lila could feel the shift in the air, the recognition from the people who had once doubted her. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need their approval. But she could hear the murmurs, the whispers of disbelief. Derek's turn came, and he took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he aimed. He fired. The shot hit the target, but it wasn't perfect. It was close, but not as close as Lila's. The scoreboard flashed, showing their scores side by side. Derek had scored a 95, but Lila had scored a 97. The room went silent. Lila stood still, her hands gripping her rifle. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. This wasn't just about beating Derek. It was about something much bigger. It was about proving to herself and to everyone else that she belonged. The judge called her name as the winner of the first round, but Lila barely heard it. She was too focused on the moment. She had done it. She had beaten the odds, taken down the top contender, and earned her place in the Oakstone Open. As she stepped away from the firing line, her legs a little shaky, her heart still pounding, she felt a presence beside her. It was Coach Donovan standing quietly, watching her with pride. "You did it," he said, his voice calm but filled with respect. "But this isn't the end. You've only just begun." Lila nodded, her eyes fixed on the target ahead. She had won this round, but the real challenge was still to come. There were more rounds, more competitors, and more obstacles, but she wasn't afraid. She had made it this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. The sun was beginning to set as Lila Woods walked toward the range, her rifle case slung across her back. The Oakstone Shooting Club was quieter today, the usual buzz of activity replaced by an almost tangible silence. She had been here so many times before, but this time felt different. This time, it wasn't about proving she could shoot as well as the others. This time it was about making history. Lila had earned her spot at the Oakstone Open, and now she was ready to do what no one had expected her to do. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about rewriting the rules. She had shown everyone what she was capable of. But now, she wanted to do something bigger. She wanted to leave a legacy that would last long after she was gone. Something more than just a first-place trophy. The day after her victory over Derek Thorne, the club's top shooter, things had changed. The whispers had stopped. The looks of disbelief and contempt were replaced with something else. Respect. People were starting to notice her, and the more they saw, the more they realized that Lila Woods wasn't just another girl with a second-hand rifle. She was a force to be reckoned with. But even with her victory, Lila knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come. She had broken through the barrier at Oakstone, but there were more barriers to break, more people to prove wrong, more walls to tear down. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. She was fighting for every kid who had been overlooked, underestimated, and told they couldn't succeed because of where they came from or what they had. Lila arrived at the range for the final round of the Oakstone Open, her heart beating fast, but steady. She had been practicing every day since her victory, refining her skills, adjusting her technique. She was ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just about winning anymore. This was about making a statement, about changing the narrative. As she walked into the club, she noticed the crowd was even bigger than before. The tension in the air was thick, as if everyone was waiting for something big to happen. Lila felt their eyes on her, some curious, some skeptical. There were still people who didn't think she belonged here, who thought her success had been a fluke. But today, she was going to prove them all wrong. Today, she was going to leave a legacy. Lila made her way to her lane, her eyes scanning the other competitors. Some of them were familiar faces, the ones who had been there since the beginning. But there was one new face, a tall, confident shooter who had been making waves in the club. His name was James Ellison, and he was known for his precise shooting and smooth technique. James had been a contender for years, always at the top, always in the spotlight. But today, Lila wasn't intimidated. She had already beaten Derek. Now, James was next. As the match began, the room fell silent. The only sound was the steady rhythm of gunshots echoing off the walls. Lila took her first shot, her hand steady, her breath calm. The shot landed dead center, a perfect 10. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She knew that the next shot, the next round, was just as important. James went next, his rifle aimed with precision. His shot was just as clean, a perfect 10 as well. Lila felt the pressure, but she didn't let it get to her. She had been here before. She had faced the doubts, the mockery, and the disbelief. But now it was different. Now she was ready. She was determined to finish what she had started. Round after round, Lila and James kept pace with each other. Their scores were nearly identical. Lila could hear the murmurs from the audience, the whispers of, "It's a battle between the two of them." She could feel the weight of their expectations, but she refused to buckle under the pressure. She was here for herself, not for anyone else. The final round was the hardest. The targets were moving faster, the time limit shorter. Lila's heart raced as she aimed her rifle, her fingers gripping the trigger. She could feel the sweat on her brow, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was it. The moment that would define everything. She took a deep breath, steadied her rifle, and fired. The shot hit the target dead center. She could hear the crowd gasp, but she didn't look at the scoreboard. She knew what she had to do. James fired his last shot, but it was just a bit off. The crowd held its breath as the scores were revealed. Lila's score flashed on the screen, 98. James's score, 96. The room erupted in applause. Lila stood there, her rifle still in hand, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had won the Oakstone Open, but it wasn't just the trophy that mattered. It was everything she had fought for. It was the recognition, the respect, and the legacy she had built. She had broken through the barriers that had once held her back. She had proven that anyone, no matter where they came from, could achieve greatness. As she walked off the range, Coach Donovan was waiting for her. He didn't say anything at first, he just looked at her with a quiet pride. "You did it," he said finally, his voice calm and filled with respect. "But this is only the beginning." Lila nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She wasn't done yet. She had made history, but there was still more to be done. She had a new goal now, to inspire others, to show them that they too could break through the barriers, could rise above the limitations that had been placed on them. As she stood there, surrounded by the sounds of applause, Lila realized that she had just begun to write her legacy, and it was a legacy that would inspire countless others to follow in her footsteps.